So let's talk about the bank failures that have occurred and the impending potential economic crisis. It does seem like there are a lot of warning signs. I'll try to recap it very, very briefly, but several banks have failed, including Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, Credit Suisse has now failed. So these banks essentially they had bank runs, meaning people try to pull money out of it. No bank has enough money to sustain a really heavy bank run. I mean, we
I think actually you got to be a little bit just like the word fail is too vague, you know?
okay, so
I think
a
there's
lot of people wanted to pull money out of the bank, and the bank didn't feel like it had quite enough money to
right, right. I'm just
make their
saying that,
depositors whole.
yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that we should make an effort to distinguish between like a liquidity problem versus like a balance sheet problem,
Okay.
right?
And
Where
did were
basically
all
like,
these liquidity problems or insolvency? So it says that some were insolvent.
right, like balance sheet insolvency. It's to be honest, it's hard to tell. I'm definitely I'm not really in a position to
Okay.
to be able to
Right.
tell.
You
But
can
for
only
example,
tell in the
like
autopsy which one was the case, but
right, but like for example, it seems like there's reason to believe Signature Bank was actually like they may have at worst I would say maybe their balance sheet was insolvent,
there is
but they
reason to
claimed
believe that
right
Signature was
yeah
okay.
yeah
And
liquidity wise at
there are
least
conspiracy theories that we will get into.
yeah
But what you will read in the news in the mainstream media is that there's bank runs, largely brought about by general jitters about crypto failure or just you just never know. It's a bank runs are caused by psychology in the marketplace. It's not even necessarily always rational. But if enough people are trying to get out their deposits, the bank can easily become insolvent, and they just don't have the money to give out to all of these people. It's not like your money, if you're not familiar with how a bank works, the bank doesn't just keep all your money in a big safe, right? It lends it out, it does stuff with it, and then when people come back, they're hoping that no more than 10-15% of people ever come back for their money at one time because they don't have more than that, you know? They may have less than 4%. I mean, even like banks keeping like 5% on hand is considered a lot, right? So recently, laws were changed where they had to keep 0% on hand. And only, recently has the Fed said, hey, you need to keep more liquid cash on hand for your depositors. But that's kind of a recent thing. So Silicon Valley Bank failed. Yeah, well, it failed. I mean, it's gone. It's gone.
well
It needed a
yeah I
bailout.
mean
It needed bailout. The creditors need. Oh, this is the depositors needed a bailout. Okay, and depositors are considered creditors.
this is where I mean for example like it's unclear to me of the banks that quote unquote failed, Signature, SVB, Silvergate, would these banks have all been okay if the bank the BTFP, whatever, the bank term funding program, I can't remember what it stands for
If it
exactly.
existed beforehand,
Exactly,
no,
like would all these
no,
banks
they
be
wouldn't
okay?
have. They wouldn't have. I think they would have lived.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah, that's what I think too.
But then that's what's disturbing because like now you've got the banks drawing money from the discount window at rates that haven't been seen since 2008. And discount window is just what is it? It's just banks borrowing money from big boy Fed. They just need liquidity, right? That's what the discount window is, right? Banks are just saying, "Give me cash. I need to have cash on hand just in case," right? Isn't they're borrowing it,
It's
right?
they are borrowing it, but it's a little bit different. It's almost like they're selling their treasuries.
Okay.
It's almost like they're selling the treasury because they're forced to give the treasuries as collateral.
Yes, but the root cause is they feel like they need more cash on hand just in case, right? That is the
See, here's the,
underlying motivation of taking from the discount window.
yeah, and also, I mean, you should point out that like right now there is no discount because normally they would, they would give you some percentage of what your collateral is
Oh, there's no
worth,
discount right
right?
now. So you're paying a
And then
high
that
price for borrowing that money. It's what you're saying.
no. It's the opposite.
Like
So
a low, no price.
normally, yeah, exactly. Normally, you give them an asset that's worth $100. Okay, this is I gotta have a disclaimer. I'm just a layman. Okay, so
Hmm.
this is like my understanding of it. Normally, you give them some asset that's worth like $100, and they take some discount, and they'll front you. Let's say that they'll give you $80 cash, right? Right now, there is no discount, meaning you give them $100 asset, they give you the full $100.
Oh, I see.
So it lets them basically, it lets all these banks take all their treasuries that are now that have been devalued due to the
And
increase.
also, the $100 asset you're giving them ain't even worth $100 really. Because
Correct.
since interest rates
Correct.
have been going up, your $100 bond that you bought, 6 months ago or whatever,
Yeah,
it's really only worth like $70.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
and the Fed it just gave you $100 in cash.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And the deal is, I think the interest rate they charge, okay, the interest rates that they charge are whatever the 1 year interest rate is. So it's like kind of like a short term
Yeah.
interest rate, which is fairly high, except my understanding is
Right.
it's actually lower than the rate of mortgage-backed securities. So like these like 30-year or whatever, mortgage-backed securities. So what the banks can actually do right now is take all their garbage, which has been devalued by the increasing interest rates. They can cash it in at the discount window, take that cash and buy mortgage-backed securities, and basically they pocket the spread, which is still positive right now.
Right. So their books look good, but it's all fake.
It's all fake.
Really, it's all fake. The
And the
numbers in
money
your
and,
it's
and
just
the
it's just
money,
it's just magic
yeah,
accounting essentially.
yeah. And this money is printed, by the way. I mean, it's
And the money is printed. So
yeah.
let's and this is difficult for me to this day. And I don't consider myself a super lay person. I know a little bit about finance, but a lot of it is still confusing. So it's not
Well,
as if we're experts here. So
definitely not. But it's like, dude, you're playing a game of chess, and then all of a sudden you checkmate the king, and then they rewrite the rules. Say, oh, the king can actually
yeah,
jump like a knight. That's what this BTFP. It basically changed the rules. Like
it's a massive bailout.
yeah.
The way I would characterize it, I want to put it in sort of lay terms, not only just to organize my thoughts, but to maybe communicate what's actually happened in the long term. So we're going to go back all the way to the beginning. Let's go all the way back to the root cause of this problem, as far as I see it. And this is very simple. Anybody who runs a household budget will understand exactly how this happens, okay? You spend more money than you make. That is the root cause of the problem. And that's what the federal government has been doing for a long, long time. They make X amount of money, but they want to spend more than X. Why? There's wars to fight, there's entitlement programs that they've got to pay. Why do they need these entitlement programs? Well, because you got to buy people's votes, right? So politicians, they're only here for 4, 8 years at a shot. They don't care necessarily about the long-term future of the United States balance sheet.
Right.
They wanna pay for programs that get them elected, make them look good. So we've been spending more than we make for a long, long time. What happens if you're just a regular old person and you spend more money than you make? Well, you incur debt. And what happens when you have debt? Well, you have to pay interest to service that debt. If we were common sense, responsible people, what we would do is we'd spend a lot less, live beneath our means, and then pay off our debt and then get square. That's what a responsible person would do. But since the federal government is not a responsible person, that's not what it's been doing. It's just been paying the interest rates on the debt. It's like you have a credit card bill and you don't pay off your credit card bill or even try. You just pay the interest on your credit card. Well, if you're a regular old person and you're doing that, we call you a moron. We call you insane. Would say your credit card bill is going to balloon out of control. Don't you know how this works? But here's the trick. The US government can do that. You know why?
They
Because they
control the
also
money
control the interest rate.
yeah,
So so imagine if you, as Joe Blow, you had a credit card bill and then you said, oh, what's my interest payment this month? Oh, God, that interest payment's really high. I don't like that. And then someone said, hey, you don't like this interest rate? Would you like to lower the interest rate? Now, Joe Blow can't do that, of course, because he doesn't have the power to do that. But the US government does have the power to do that. And what would you say if you were Joe Blow? You would say, hell yeah, I'd love to lower that interest rate. Now I only have to pay like $5 on this gigantic debt that I've racked up. How do I do that? And they say, well, just press this button and the interest rate is lowered. Would you press that button as just a regular Joe? You probably would. And so that's what the federal government has been doing. Why have interest rates been so damn low? They said different things. They're like, oh, we want to spur the economy. We want to, we want, economic growth to happen and all that. I was like, really? For 20 something years? We've needed economic growth for 20 something years? Like, no, that's not why. It's because they have debt. And just like a regular Joe, their debt that they have to pay the interest rate on, their debt is more onerous if interest rates are high. So they have tried to keep them artificially low. But then what happens in an environment where interest rates are super, super low? Well, keep in mind the federal government isn't the only player in the game with money. You also have retirees, you have pension funds, you have 401ks, you have mutual funds, you have banks. You have so many people with a lot of money, and they got to put money somewhere and do something with money to be productive. They're not going to keep buying bonds and shit if you artificially keep your interest rates low. Like T-bills give you nothing. That's why, CDs have been giving nothing for years and years and years. What are they going to do? They're going to buy stocks. They're going to buy crypto. They're going to buy real estate. They're going to look for all sorts of avenues to put money in to make money that are way better than your shitty bonds that give no interest rates, right? And the stock market's just going to have a 14-year bull run. Crypto is going to have massive inflows. BlackRock is going to buy up a bunch of commercial and residential real estate. So that's what's happened, and that in turn creates A, bubbles, B, inflationary pressure, because there's just like an unnatural amount of people trying to buy stocks and real estate and crypto and Bored Ape NFTs and whatever the fuck they can spend money on. They're spending money on it, but it's not bonds, right? So they've created this environment that goes all the way. That's 20 years back. That's 25. I don't know how long it's been that they've had an artificially low interest rate environment. And the pandemic happened. And they decided that we need to shut down. Erroneously, they decided we need to shut down. I don't know if they were just dumb and they thought we needed to shut down to save people's lives, or they wanted to do a great reset kind of thing. And they also said in tandem, we need to do stimmy checks. We need to stimulate the economy by handing out PPP loans and your 500, 600, whatever dollar checks. That's printing money. That's more inflation while having low interest rates. So what happened was you dump all this money in the economy, and what happens? Then people are spending this money. More inflationary pressure, right? More demand for stuff. During the pandemic, I walked by Louis Vuitton stores and there was a line stretched around like the fucking corner of people wanting to buy Louis Vuitton bags. And I'm not trying to stereotype necessarily, but the people in line, I could tell just by looking at them, they are not your typical luxury goods buyer. So you are creating more demand for all sorts of shit, including Louis Vuitton bags. The owner of LVMTH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, whatever, he became like the third richest or richest man on earth during this pandemic time. You know why? Because all of this money is flowing into luxury goods, right? And his company's stock shot up. So you have all this money flowing in, that's increasing inflationary pressure. But then where does money eventually end up? It ends up in a bank somewhere, right? Even if you give money to Louis Vuitton or you give money to this vendor or that company or this company, they eventually put it in a bank, or rich people, they eventually they do something, it goes somewhere. And banks had an immense amount of cash. They brought in a lot of cash during the pandemic. Makes sense, because more cash is printed. It's got to end up somewhere. And banks need to do something productive with it as well. And what did a lot of banks do? They bought bonds, because that's one of the safest things to buy. It's not even dumb to buy T-bills and bonds. It's like, it's pretty safe, right? But in order to get higher yields,
in
theory, yes. So I don't think you're a retard if you're buying bonds and you're running a bank. So a lot of banks bought these long-term T-bills, 10 years. Silicon Valley was one of them. They had a bunch of money and they said, oh, what are we going to do with this money? I mean, we don't want to dump it all into crypto. We don't have, I mean, even though we're giving money like candy to all of these startups, we don't even have enough startups to give money to. So what are we going to do with all the rest of the money? So they bought 10 years with it because that was probably viewed as a pretty safe thing to do. Well, what happened then? Even though the Fed claimed that inflation was transitory, it turns out it's not transitory. It turns out everybody else, the naysayers, it was right. When you print this much money, inflation is sticky. It's not going to be transitory. And, eggs, gas, whatever, we all are familiar with inflation. Well, what does the Fed do as a solution to inflation? They raise interest rates.
It it almost makes you want to, I mean, it makes you ask, like, what was their justification in saying, like, what were their reasons for saying that they thought inflation is transitory? You know,
My guess is that they knew it wasn't, but they just wanted to lie. Okay, so
okay. Yeah.
continuing this long story of either incompetence or malice. So the Fed realized, whoops, inflation's not transitory. We got to raise interest rates a lot. Well, when you raise interest rates, what that means is people who bought bonds back when the interest rates were low, those bonds are not worth as much anymore. Because think about it, like if you bought $100 bond and only gave you like 0.1% interest, right? Meaning you only make $1 after 10 years or whatever the number was. That bond, nobody's going to want to buy it. And if they're going to buy it, they buy it for like $60 because today they could buy a new fresh bond that pays them 4%, $4 per $100. So, they're going to only pay you 60 or something for your current, the bond that you bought when it was the dumb 1%, right? Now, on the books, all of the things that you thought were worth $100, they're now really only worth 60. Now, that's not really a problem if you just hold it. If you just hold it for 10 years or until interest rates kind of go back to where they were, then you're fine. Like I have some bonds and some of them have gone down in value, but it's fine because I only hold like 3-month bonds. So I'm just going to wait and I'm just going to cash them out when it matures. But the thing is, when you're Silicon Valley Bank and you have all these bonds that were worth $100, you paid $100 for them, but now because the Fed just suddenly shot interest rates up, those bonds are really on the market only worth 70 if you try to sell them. Okay, still not a problem unless all of your customers come asking for their money. And then you've got to give them something because as soon as you tell one customer, sorry, we don't got your money, your bank has failed. So it's far preferable for you to sell your assets to get some cash and pay the person who just asked for their money. But the problem is, at the moment, a lot of your $100 bonds that you just bought 6 months ago, they're only worth $70. And if you're forced to sell them, you realize a $30 loss. And that's what happened to SVB. And all of that kind of makes sense structurally. Like, okay, I see how their bank failed. I see why. But here's my big question. The folks at the Fed, are they incompetent? Are they full of malice? Was this intentional? Did they not know that this kind of shit would happen? They know how this all works, right? They have PhDs in economics. I don't even have a PhD in economics, but I know that, hey, you raise these rates and these people are holding the bonds, and what do you think is going to happen, right? I don't understand. And
It,
just like to your point, you said, well, some of these banks wouldn't have failed or if they had this new tool, this credit window or whatever that they
yeah.
just created in response to. But then you guys are PhDs. Did you not see this coming? Why didn't you create this thing, this tool beforehand for banks like SVB, banks like Signature, et cetera, right? Is it just pure incompetence that you didn't see that, oh, wait, high interest rates might cause some banks to fail like this. Now, not all banks will fail like this. Like there's ways to hedge your bonds, right? Like say, we won't go, it's complicated, but you could you can hedge almost any bet that you make in finance, right? Just in case interest rates rise really high, then you're covered. Silicon Valley Bank didn't. Now, conservatives and people on the right will like to dunk on Silicon Valley Bank and say, well, the reason why they didn't hedge the banks is because they were morons run by diversity hires. I won't say that I'm immune to that. I also like to dunk on them for that. But in fairness, that might not be the real issue. It might be more systemic than that. And it might even be more intentional than that. Because when you're asking yourself, why didn't the Fed see this coming and have these tools in place already so that these banks wouldn't fail? There are people, such as Kim Iverson on YouTube, who have floated this idea that there's a concerted effort by the federal government to target crypto-friendly banks.
When I first moved money into Gemini, it was so they were using Silvergate.
Right. So it's just on-ramps and places that smooth over the process
Signature,
of dealing in
yes.
crypto.
Signature sounded like they were like a custodian for stablecoins, the
Right. Signature
dollar
and
stablecoin.
SVB. And just as a quick aside, I hold a little bit of USDC. USDC lost its peg because it had $3 billion in Silicon Valley Bank.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
And then there's now a $3 billion hole in your $44 billion sheet. And so people were running out of USDC. Now, just to let you know, if you're not familiar with crypto, this is a cataclysmic event because the USDC was viewed as the most dependable stablecoin. Like if you could trust anything,
Oh, actually,
you can trust it.
I like GUSD more, but
Most
USDC
most
was
people did have confidence in USDC though.
yeah.
And
It
it
had
does turn out, yeah, it has a lot of people backing it. And it does turn out that they were fine. Number one, because of course all depositors in Silicon Valley were bailed out by the federal government. But number two, because BlackRock said, even before that, BlackRock said they would backstop it. So
Mhm.
they were fine. USDC is essentially BlackRock's stablecoin. And whether that gives you pause because BlackRock is evil or that gives you confidence because BlackRock is evil, I don't know, but it probably should be both. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory to target crypto and to usher in the new era of CBDC, with greater controls and all that. Depending on who you watch on YouTube, this theory is, weak to strong, but you decide for yourself. I will say that the way the big boys in the federal government have behaved raises a lot of questions because you'd hope they'd be smart enough to see this sort of thing coming. And if they are smart enough to see this sort of thing coming, then you're wondering, well, why didn't they do some of these things beforehand to prevent Silvergate, to prevent Silicon Valley Bank? Because now they're bailing out depositors under the pretense that, well, we don't want a bank run, we don't want a bank crisis. Like, yeah, but if you're able to see this coming, you know how they say an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Well, you would have done like a little bit of these things beforehand, even, but they didn't. Is it because you're incompetent, or is it because you wanted these banks to fail, these
Well,
particular ones?
first question is yes. I mean, basically, the related question to what you asked is why didn't this happen in the past whenever interest rates were increased, right?
But they didn't increase like they have been in the last year, though, to be fair.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a couple. I think the two main distinctions that I see are is number one, just what you said, the rate at which the interest rates were increased is different this time, and number two, probably there's never been a time in the past when the banks have held so many treasuries, basically. This time was a direct result of the COVID stimulus, right? All the money that was printed basically wound up back into the banks, just like you said. It just moves from one bank to another. And then those banks had to do something with it, and they bought these treasuries. Any of these banks, unless you can prove that they would have died even with like
Right,
the BTFP and the discount window.
right.
The other question you're saying is like, is this just incompetence from the Fed? But basically, they've known about this for at least a year, and I think they were just hoping that people wouldn't notice because ultimately the
And
issue here
not do the bank runs and not do the
exactly
bank runs. Okay.
exactly. But I think there was one piece of this puzzle that was that I didn't really understand until today. I was reading some stuff, which is that when the Fed raises interest rates, people are going to, and the banks are currently paying people almost like no interest. What are you going to do? You're going to be chasing a higher interest rate, right?
Right.
And
Why
that
don't you go buy bonds?
it doesn't even have to be a Silicon Valley Bank situation where there's potential, FUD being spread around about their situation. It could just be as simple as a person wanting to withdraw their money in
It
search
could
of
be.
a higher rate. And I think that's probably what's driving a lot of this discount window or BTFP usage right now. Because I mean, the Fed is basically saying we're stepping in, and so your bank's not going to go. It's not. It's going to have the liquidity. So why are you still withdrawing your money? I think a lot of people are just chasing
Right.
higher interest rates.
And especially when if it's the average Joe, you're covered by FDIC. How many, so few people have more than 250K in their bank.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
have to worry. Even if you're in a regional bank, you are covered. There's
Yeah.
no reason for you to move your money because you think it's going to be gone. So if you are moving your money, it's either because, you're reacting rashly to some news, or like you said, you're just chasing some better yield somewhere else. And the idea that they could just hide it, wow, if that's what they thought, then I have even less confidence in the people running the federal government because
I
what do you
really
what do
think
you
that's
what do you
it.
mean
Yeah.
What do you mean don't notice it? Like one of the big people who quote unquote noticed something was wrong was the Bank of Saudi Arabia. They're the ones who started the whole run on Swiss Credit Suisse, right? Because they said, "Oh, we're." They basically did a no confidence in Credit Suisse, right? And that started everybody to look at it and say, "Wait, is our money safe in Credit Suisse?" And that was the end because it wasn't. It was their books were not solid. But why are we to think that the people in the Bank of Saudi Arabia are not competent? Of course they are. They're looking at these numbers way closer to your average than your average Joe. You can't fool some of these institutional investors and
I
no,
mean,
I don't,
also they wanted to think about it. They also, I mean, they were trying to control inflation, right? They wanted to raise the rates. So
which is
it
fair, but
it's like they start raising the rates and then they're like, oh shit, there's this problem. And I mean, if they had acted on this early, that would really have it would
maybe
have
they were afraid that if they did something early, it
it
would
would hindered
cause
their
panic.
it would hinder their whole
Yeah.
objective of controlling inflation. Like before
Right.
they could even get going, they would already be like, oh shit.
We should
That's why.
also talk about
Yeah.
another angle. We should also talk about another angle, which is so Silicon Valley Bank. It's not a bunch of, I've got $10,000 in the bank, regular, Joe, whatever.
Right.
It's a lot of VCs, it's a lot of startups who were part of this kind of vertically integrated bank where they're like, "Oh, keep all your money with us and also do all of your mortgages with us and all, it's just kind of the Silicon I mean, the name is Silicon Valley Bank. So you kind of get even from there the idea of what they're all about, which is to
Mhm.
service the folks in Silicon Valley. And they were bailed out. And by the way, the Biden administration will say it's not a bailout. Yellen will say it's not a bailout. It's money. It's just coming from the FDIC insurance pools. Like, yeah, but if you're taking from that pool, then what's going to replenish the pool? More money from all the banks, right? Where do banks get all their money? Regular people. What are you talking about, right? And you're printing money. You're increasing the money supply. What does that create? Inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is a tax. And by the way, it's inflation is a tax that is harder on regular people than it is on rich people. Rich people are not even always hurt by inflation because a lot of their assets go up in value. But regular people have to pay for eggs and housing, and that is a big piece of their budget. And so they are taxed heavily for this sort of stuff. So to call it not a bailout is just disingenuous. It just relies on your ignorance and stupidity. Don't let them do that. It is a
But there is,
bailout.
yeah,
You're bailing out this bank, the
right.
regular
But there
person.
is there is this distinction because again, this is kind of it's like when we were talking about, what does it mean that the bank failed or whatever. It's like this term bailout is a bit vague, and I think some people are making, and I think rightfully so, the distinction that in this case, the equity and shareholder and the equity holders and bondholders of the bank got wiped out. So in that
That's
sense, they
true.
did
That's
they
true.
did not get bailed out.
That's true. But
Uh,
in a
yeah,
situation like Silicon Valley Bank, the vast majority of the depositors are the rich people. It's
yeah, rich people.
startups. It's
Yep.
it's not your local credit union, okay, where almost everybody has less than $50,000. If that was the situation, the character and nature of a bailout of depositors would look a lot different. So many of the depositors were wealthy people, were startups, were VCs, and
So how do you feel about that actually?
I don't agree with that. I don't think that they should have been bailed out. And we're going to talk about one of our favorite people on earth, which is David Sachs, but I personally feel that he has a blind spot in this because he's a Silicon Valley VC. I'm not going to say that because he had money in there, he's being disingenuous with his arguments. No, I think he's being sincere. And just so, to be clear, he's totally for the bailouts. He's thinking, we've got to bail out SVB. Otherwise, there's going to be a larger bank crisis, and it's for the good of everybody if you
Yeah,
bail out
contagion.
rich
Yeah.
guys like me. It's not just rich guys like me, it's a whole system at stake. That's his argument, essentially, right?
I've heard him try to. I think I heard him argue also. These depositors did nothing wrong.
I agree. They did nothing wrong. But sometimes you do nothing wrong and you still lose money, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
I think this is a difficult. Well, yeah, and along the same lines, there are a lot of people that did nothing wrong, and for example, there's a lot of poor people in the country that they did nothing wrong. What should we do for them? But
and
I mean,
another thing to
yeah,
remind
but
people is like their haircut wouldn't have even been that big. It would have been like 20%.
mm.
So even if
Yeah,
you're a rich person who had a lot of money in this Silicon Valley bank, it's not like you lost all of it.
yeah. The thing is, I'm really out of. I have no way of evaluating, the claim about contagion and how bad it would be, and to be honest, he doesn't really either know. He doesn't know either.
Right. Nobody can
Uh,
see into the future.
yeah.
His guess is that contagion would have been bad if we didn't, be
But
really aggressive in stopping it right here, right now.
these are actually still arguments about what is going to be the best in the near short term. I don't think anybody is honestly trying to. I mean, or at least I don't think he necessarily is trying to argue that this would be better in the very long term. Like I'm saying, like 100 years from now or something. Uh,
Yeah, and if he doesn't have a good argument for it to be good in the long term, I feel like his argument is very weak. Because let's just say we, prevent a contagion and we can prevent pain in the short term. Sometimes pain in the short term is good in the long term. It's just due, right? We
yeah, yeah,
cannot, an
yeah,
economic cycle is actually pretty healthy. We cannot sustain a bull run in perpetuity. And
yeah.
attempting to do so, I think it's probably going to create more problems than it
I just
solves.
yeah, I agree with that because fundamentally I believe that there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Right.
There's always a cost to things, right? And it's just in this case the cost is much harder to see and it's obscure and probably only noticeable in the very long run.
So I don't agree with Sachs in this instance, and I
But
definitely want to.
on the other hand, right? Like I've been saying this whole time, it's like if Silicon Valley Bank had access to all the same,
Well, if
if
they had access to these tools, they probably would be solvent. They'd be okay right now.
yeah,
However,
yeah.
should these tools even exist? Are they just band-aids slapped on top of like your jugular bleeding out?
These tools are directly against what the Fed was trying to do with raising. It defeats the whole purpose of raising rates. Is kind of what that's my current understanding.
I mean, at the end of the
You
day,
raise rates,
also,
you raise rates to lower inflation, but now you're just back to the money
and
printing.
also
So
you raise rates to kind of wash the tide out, right? I mean, it kind of comes down to how strongly do you believe in free market capitalism? Because a lot of people say they believe in free market capitalism, but the thing
right,
about free market capitalism is inherent inside free market capitalism is that there are losers in it and there is pain, and that is a natural process of it. Sort of like how if you believe in nature and the natural cycle and order of things, you know what that includes? It includes, like lions ripping their prey to shreds. It includes ugly stuff happening every single day. There is a sort of a beautiful balance to it. It works. But when we try to prevent all the ugly parts, the distasteful parts, it doesn't work. And that's how that's the analogy I would make to the economy. We need some banks to fail. We need businesses to fail. This idea that things are too big to fail is already I wouldn't
well, yeah.
say.
I mean, now apparently even community banks or whatever
Yeah,
are,
even a community
are
bank is too big to fail. Like, okay,
yeah.
if you just said maybe the top four banks are too big to fail, okay, I can buy that. But is everything too big to fail? Well, so what's going to fail? If no companies can fail, then how do we
There's a cost to, I mean, there's a huge cost to saying that even the top four banks are too big to fail, right? Which is
right.
concentration, basically.
Concentration and also a concept called moral hazard, which is just a fancy way of saying that if you don't let people fail, then you incentivize people to behave recklessly,
Hmm.
and that's not good.
Yeah.
People need to know that there's consequences to doing things poorly, and if you
Yeah.
don't let them fail because they've done bad stuff, then the system as a whole is very unhealthy.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the Stanford DEI dean.
Yeah, that's a good segue to that. But yeah, essentially, moral hazard is this idea that the system needs to correct bad behavior, inefficient behavior, and the Fed is preventing the system from doing that. When I say correct, that means ugliness. That means things failing. That means people losing money. I'm sorry to say that, but that's part of it. And
Yeah, the
we
thing about this though is I feel like it's justified. I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of satisfied with the outcome because again, the bank and the bank itself and the shareholders and the bondholders supposedly got wiped out. So
right.
I just can't get myself, I just keep thinking, what if I was one of those depositors, right? Like,
Well, if you were one of those depositors, you should spread your money out a little bit wider, right? Why is like millions and millions of your money in Silicon Valley Bank? Shouldn't it be spread
okay, I
out?
mean, yeah, I guess that's a reasonable argument.
I mean, you're not so rich that's impossible, right? You're not Elon Musk, so you could
Not even
spread out
close.
your
No, no,
money.
no,
Yeah.
not even close. But I'm just saying, no, I'm just saying, what if I had was one of these startups or whatever, and I was,
Uh-huh.
let's say I had $100 million in there.
What if you're Roku?
I mean, was I expected to? Yeah. So I guess you could make I think it's legit to say that, yeah, I should have engaged in basic risk management and perhaps, distributed that 100 million across multiple institutions. But I don't think it's reasonable to say that, that person should have, looked at Silicon Valley Bank's books and analyzed them and,
No,
figured out
I
that they
don't
had,
I don't
yeah.
I don't think that's the case either. But also, let's not forget that the people who had a lot of money deposited Silicon Valley Bank, they got a lot of perks. They got like, apparently they got really free easy lines of credit.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of benefit.
It's probably, to be honest, it kind of sounds like, given that Saks is in it, it's probably like one of those old white boy networks.
What do you mean by white boy? You mean just like white men?
No,
It's
no, I'm
it's
just saying
run by
like
like women, that bank though.
okay, but I'm just saying like this is pure speculation, right? It's
Uh-huh.
maybe a situation, and I was triggered by what you said about perks. That maybe there's a lot of sort of, like gentleman handshake type agreements or
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like
yeah.
think about all those startups that are not even fucking close to being profitable and how much line of credit this SVB extended those people.
Uh,
Tons. And if they asked a bunch of other financial institutions for a line of credit and then those financial institutions asked them back, they said, okay, why should I give you $20 million line of credit? Do you make money? Do you have stuff? And they would say, no, it's all theoretical. And then those other institutions probably tell them to fuck off, right? But Silicon Valley Bank didn't say that because they're the bank for the VCs. And so
yeah.
there was a benefit to putting your money there. And that's what you were buying. But then at the same time, you're buying that at a risk. And the risk was you're in a local bank and you're not insured by the FDIC. So, and you're engaging in behavior that is in that gray area of moral hazard, right? It feels kind of irresponsible in hindsight. So, do I think that they're evil and, oh yeah, these VCs, they deserve to lose all their money? No, I don't. But they took on a certain heightened level of risk for a heightened level of perks. They got more out of SVB than they would have gotten out of other institutions. I'm sure of it. So, it's a trade-off. Now that they lost, they're asking for the federal government to step in and bail them out. And I understand. If it was me, it's hard. It's easy to be. Everybody likes to dunk on these VCs because a lot of them are libertarian bros or whatever. Right? And it's like, oh, it's not so libertarian now, right? It's like,
Exactly.
okay,
Yeah.
that's a fair criticism. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it was my millions of dollars, I might, betray my own principles as well because it's my millions of dollars. Fair enough. They are hypocrites, but at the same time, I feel for them. I will say this. This
But
whole
the fact that that you reminded me that it's not a total loss for them if we had to build out. I mean that's also important to mention.
right, they wouldn't have lost all their money, maybe
Yeah.
20%. And is
Yeah.
that a fair haircut to ask because you guys wanted to do risky things at a risky bank because
Yeah.
that bank
Exactly. Yeah. If you put it that way, it seems like that seems reasonable to me. Because
um
yeah, they definitely there were benefits
They
for
definitely
them.
got benefits. These VCs, they were living fat on, the free flowing VC money and the whole tech, and tech money has been free flowing for a long time. And Silicon Valley Bank is part of that apparatus. One thing I will say that personally that changed my perspective, and I'm glad. I will admit sometimes when my perspective was misinformed or wrong, and I will change my mind and adjust, was when the pandemic happened and they were handing out free money like candy in the form of stimmy checks, right? And also to a lesser degree, PPP loans. My impression was that goddamn government is just printing out free money for losers, who just will like spend it on stupid shit like liquor and Louis Vuitton bags, and this is spiking our inflation. And all these people are just gonna like these dumbasses are causing our inflation to go up. Don't they know the end result of all of this? Don't they know what's going to happen at the end of this? They're so stupid. I hope they enjoy their goddamn LV bags because the end result of this is inflation, right? So I blamed a lot of let's just be honest. Let's just call a spade let's call a spade a spade. I blamed a lot of people who are poor for a lot of these inflationary pressures, right? Because that's who stimmy checks were for, right? There's just like everybody, and
Right.
poor people
Yeah.
misspent it, right?
Yeah, but the stimmy checks all wind up into banks anyways.
The
That's,
stimmy
yeah,
checks all wind up into the banks, and
yeah.
when the shit hits the fan, what does the federal government do? It prints even more goddamn money to bail out who?
Rich,
Rich
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Rich people. So it's not fair to just say, oh, yeah, the inflation is because of the poors and they were spending money on bags and this and that. And like, yeah, that's part of it. That is part of it. However,
No, it's the money printer. Yeah,
it's the money printer overall. And the money printer,
it's
at
controlled
the end of
by.
the day, it's controlled by the Fed and it benefits rich people a lot. And
Yeah.
it's doing that right now. They're printing billions and billions of dollars because rich
That's why.
people
Yeah,
mismanage their shit.
that's why. Number one, I feel like ultimately all this mess, it is our fault. 'Cause it's like we get the government that we deserve, and
Yeah, we voted for it.
number two, I feel like this is why we're like the Fed is basically operating on obscurity. It basically is relying on people not understanding what is happening. If you understood, if you were, let's say if you were a person of not well means, if you're
Well,
a
it's
poor
worse for rich
person,
people. Rich people presumably understand,
well, yeah. Well, I'm
right?
saying, well, rich people have assets, so they
Yeah.
don't care as much. I'm just saying, like, if poor people figured out what was going on, like this would
They'll
stop.
be the most against it. They'll be the
Yeah,
most.
exactly.
Think about it. Think about it.
This would stop
You,
immediately.
average Joe, the government cut you a check for $600 and then $1,000. So maybe you got $1,600. Child credits maybe bumps it up to $3,000. Okay. However, they're gonna cut rich. Look at all these quote unquote tools and programs being set up to bail out banks. They're giving rich people way more money and printing way more money so that these institutions can thrive and have their bull market and their asset prices don't tank too much.
If you think about it, right, like basically what's happened from a higher level is that so the stimmy checks were divided among many, many people, right? And all that money got pooled up into bonds, which are now underwater. Those bonds are owned by very few institutions relative
Correct.
to the number of people that got the stimmy checks.
Correct.
And those institutions now are profiting from the second round of
Right.
of bailout.
Exactly.
Right. So yeah, so it's like the same amount of money got now divided. It's like we have round two, but this
Right.
time much fewer participants are getting it.
All your
Yeah.
you went ahead and spent your stimmy check on the purse that you didn't need, or on liquor that you didn't need, or whatever the fuck, or an iPhone that you didn't need. And at the end of the day, all of that money, billions, ended up in a bank somewhere or a financial institution. They bought a bond at $100 a piece or $1,000 a piece, interest rate 1 or whatever, and now the government has essentially and since the interest rates went up, their bonds, the value of their bonds decreased, and the government they didn't even have to write a law. The Fed just said by fiat. They
That's
said they
weird,
said
isn't it?
they
That's
didn't
so
have to.
weird.
Nobody you voted for had any control over what was just done. The federal government just told all of these institutions, "Hey, you got $100 of a bond. It's only worth 60 now. Give it to us." It's like, "Oh, okay, I'll give it to you. What will you give me? I'm gonna give you $100 in cash." What the fuck just happened? They just gave these financial institutions $30 for every $100. Where does that come from? You can say, "Oh, it doesn't come from taxes." Like, okay, they printed the money. You know where printing money comes from, right? It comes from inflation, which it shows up in the price of your eggs, man, in the price of your gas, in the price of your clothing, in the price of your Uber. It is a tax on you. It is a tax on the regular person. And they just gave out 30 cents on the dollar And nobody you voted for, you're like, well, it's a democracy. Can the person I voted into Congress prevent this? Nope. Nope. They had no control over it. You think they had, it just happened. It happened on a Sunday,
Yeah.
right? It happened on a
That-
Sunday. Where was the legislative process to okay this? There's
That's
none.
actually, yeah, that's actually insane. Like now that you say that, I mean, historically, was the Fed supposed to be, because I know nothing about history actually.
This powerful? Yes, it was
Well,
always intended to be this powerful.
not this problem, but was it, because right now we are talking about the Fed as if it was part of the federal government, right?
It's
Is the
technically
is the
not.
Fed yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was trying
Yeah.
to ask. Is that, I mean, but it seems like for all practical purposes,
In
it
in practicality, it is.
seems like it is. But what's supposedly like the check on that to make it, not part of the federal government?
Well, the closest control on the Fed is the executive branch. So who do you vote as president is the closest ability for you to control what happens at the Fed.
Yeah, that doesn't seem it doesn't seem good enough. Because I mean, well, we had Trump, right? I mean, Trump Jay Powell was
But
in
then,
office.
yeah, I will just clue you into who was the chairman of Fed for like 20 years? Alan Greenspan.
Right.
So that in itself, and in those 20 years, were there Democrat
Yeah,
presidents
yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah,
Republican presidents?
yeah. So it's like a uniparty thing.
Yeah, so it's a uniparty thing. It's not even as if, oh, when the Democrats get in, they're going to put the Democrat Fed chairman in, and the Republicans get in, they're going to have their. No, it seems like they all kind of agree.
Money printing is
Yeah,
good.
they all pretty much agree on this. So
That's
you think
insane.
if you think you can vote for this guy or that guy, and that will change the direction of the Fed, I'm sorry to tell you that you're wrong.
The way you can vote though, actually, is I feel a little slimy in saying it, but you can vote with your dollars. That's one way.
Right.
Yeah,
You can move your money out of US dollars and buy
yeah.
BTC or yuan or whatever the fuck you want to do with your dollars. I don't know.
Another thing, actually, I want to just talk about briefly is that liquidity swap thing that they announced yesterday, right? Yeah, they just announced it
Hmm.
yesterday, the Fed. And I had no idea what the hell that was. And watching, Meet Kevin talked about it, and that helped a little bit. But then this morning I read there was a Twitter thread from Arthur Hayes, and it's basically to expand this bailout program internationally. So imagine you are some international bank and you own treasuries that you also bought during the pandemic, let's say. So you have this treasury that's not worth what you paid for it. Now, with this new program, you're going to be able to essentially do the same thing as banks in the U.S. And the way that works is you take your treasury, and the Bank of Japan can now offer the same deal the Fed is off.
Right.
The
So
Fed is
basically
offering
we're
the Bank of
bailing
the
out all banks. We're bailing out all banks all
exactly.
over the world.
So the Bank of
You know
Japan
why?
said,
You know why though? And this goes back to something that I've always said, an axiom that I've always said. Never trust what people say. Always trust what people do. And this like what does this say? What does it say to you? It says that the US government is worried about confidence in the dollar. And they will tell you to your face that everything is fine.
so basically the local bank in Japan takes their treasury, they sell it to the Bank of Japan who buys it for the face value again, so they don't suffer any loss. So where does the Bank of Japan get the dollars, right? So now they print the yen, they give the yen to the Fed, the Fed via the swap program. The Fed gives them
Right.
the $100.
This is another inflationary pressure, by the way.
So yeah, so it's more money printing.
Yep. All around the world because we want to maintain our dollar, which I don't disagree with. The world is better with the dollar as a reserve currency, but at what cost?
But
There's a
doesn't this seem?
cost.
I mean, now that we've been talking about all this, doesn't it make the interest rate? What they do with interest rates, it seems almost academic, right? Because it's like, what's going to happen if they raise the rates is that, of course, more of these bonds are going to, the value of these bonds are going to go down more and more, but then that doesn't really matter because all these banks can cash in their bonds at this either the discount window or this BTFP program.
That's
so,
right.
So it's like the way it, so it'll still, even if they raise the rates, there's still going to be money printing. It just shows up at a different area, in the accounting, basically.
Well, I think we've exhausted this topic. I told you guys it would be long, but you know what? There's a potentially impending financial crisis, so it's going to be a long episode, right? Hopefully it doesn't. No, actually, I can't even say that I hope it doesn't happen. It may need to happen just as a healthy part of the economic cycle. The powers that be can't let you think that there's going to be mass inflation because what are people going to do? Are they going to lose all faith in the currency? They can't have that, right? That would be real disaster. People
So
had
what are they
zero.
gonna? Yeah, what are they gonna do though? I mean,
I
it's
don't
just,
know.